What if heaven and hell are not eternal destinations, but states of mind? What if everything you've been taught about heaven and hell is wrong? What if they're not places waiting for us after death, but states we experience in our minds every single day? In this video, we're going to explore a radically different perspective on heaven and hell, one that might challenge everything you thought you knew. According to Buddhism, these aren't physical realms we go to after we die. Instead, heaven and hell are mental states, shaped by our karma, actions, and the way we think. Heaven isn't just a blissful paradise, and hell isn't just fiery torment. These are inner experiences created by our thoughts, actions, and intentions. The key question is, how do these inner realms shape our everyday lives? This is more than just an abstract idea. It's about how we experience joy and suffering right here and now. Imagine if you could shift your inner state from torment to peace, from suffering to bliss, without waiting for the afterlife. By exploring this perspective, we can begin to see how we can create our own heaven or hell in our daily lives. This perspective can change how you approach your struggles and moments of joy. It invites you to rethink how you react to life's challenges and how you can begin to create a state of inner peace, regardless of external circumstances. Understanding this Buddhist view of heaven and hell could transform the way you live and experience the world. 1. Defining heaven and hell in Buddhism. In many religious traditions, heaven and hell are understood as distant, ethereal places. Heaven as a realm of eternal peace and reward, hell as a domain of never-ending punishment. These concepts are often viewed as destinations where one's actions in life determine their eternal fate. However, in Buddhism, this understanding is turned on its head. Heaven and hell, rather than being physical realms that one ascends or descends to after death, are seen as mental states that we experience based on our actions, thoughts, and intentions in the present moment. This shift in perspective can be both liberating and empowering, as it suggests that we hold the power to shape our own heaven or hell in the here and now, through our behavior, our mindset, and our relationship with the world around us. Let's dive into this Buddhist interpretation of heaven and hell and explore what it truly means for our daily lives. The essence of Buddhist cosmology. At the heart of Buddhist cosmology lies the concept of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. In Buddhism, samsara is driven by ignorance and craving, tanha, which perpetuate our attachment to the world and our desires. Within samsara, beings are continuously reborn into 6 distinct realms: the deva realm, heavenly beings; the human realm, the asura realm, titans or demigods; the animal realm, the preta realm, hungry ghosts; and the naraka realm, hell beings. But these realms are not permanent, nor are they physical destinations. They are states of existence that are dependent on our karma, the actions, thoughts, and intentions we generate through our lives. In other words, rather than envisioning these realms as separate, distant places, they are best understood as mental states that we move through in the course of our lives, influenced by our own choices and the energy we create. Karma, the architect of our mental realms. In Buddhism, karma refers to the law of cause and effect. Our actions, whether good or bad, create the conditions for future experiences. These experiences manifest in the form of either happiness or suffering, depending on the nature of the karma that has been created. This is a crucial point in understanding how heaven and hell are mental states shaped by karma, not physical locations determined by some divine judgment. Let me share a personal example to illustrate how this works. A few years ago, I found myself in a particularly difficult situation at work. There was a project I had been working on for months, and despite my best efforts, things kept going wrong. My manager was upset, and I felt like a failure. I could feel the frustration, self-doubt, and anger building inside me, and I started blaming everyone else: my team, the clients, even the circumstances. I became consumed by negative thoughts, and as a result, my experience of work felt like a personal hell. I was stuck in a loop of anger and resentment, unable to focus on any solutions or progress. But then, something shifted. I started practicing mindfulness, taking a step back and observing my thoughts without judgment. I recognized that my anger and frustration were simply mental states, born out of my own reactions to the situation. I chose to let go of the blame and accepted responsibility for my part in the project's struggles. Gradually, my mindset shifted from one of resentment to one of problem solving. The more I focused on solutions and tried to be patient with myself and others, the more my experience at work improved. It was like I had moved from a state of mental hell to one of peace and clarity, right here in the midst of my daily life. This shift is a clear example of how heaven and hell are states of mind shaped by our actions and thoughts. The external circumstances hadn't changed, but my internal response to them did. Instead of suffering, I found peace. I had created my own version of heaven simply by choosing a different mental approach. Heaven and hell as mental states. In Buddhism, heaven and hell are not permanent afterlife destinations, but temporary states we inhabit as a result of our actions, thoughts, and mental patterns. Heaven is not a place in the sky. It's the mental state we experience when we cultivate positive actions, thoughts, and intentions. Likewise, hell is not a fiery pit of eternal suffering. It's the inner turmoil we feel when we harbor negative emotions such as anger, greed, jealousy, and hatred. For example, when we act out of generosity, compassion, or wisdom, we create mental states that align with heaven. Our hearts feel light, and our minds are at peace. We experience joy, love, and contentment, not because of anything external, but because we've cultivated the right mental conditions. These mental states are like stepping into a personal paradise. Conversely, when we act out of greed, anger, or ignorance, we create mental states that mirror the suffering found in hell. Anger can lead us to lash out at others, causing harm to ourselves and those around us. It creates turmoil in our hearts and minds, leading to suffering that feels just as real and painful as any physical torment. In these moments, we are living in our own personal hell, and the external world is merely reflecting the inner turmoil we've created. Buddhism's approach to transforming hell into heaven. The Buddhist teachings provide a clear path for transforming these mental states. By understanding that heaven and hell are created by our own mental conditions, we can begin to practice mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom to change our experience of reality. One of the central practices in Buddhism is mindfulness, the practice of paying attention to the present moment without judgment. Through mindfulness, we learn to observe our thoughts, emotions, and reactions, recognizing when we are slipping into negative states and choosing to redirect our focus. Mindfulness allows us to recognize the seeds of anger, greed, or jealousy before they take root and cause harm, giving us the opportunity to choose a different mental path. Ethical conduct, as outlined in the 5 precepts, also plays a critical role in transforming our mental states. By living in accordance with principles of non-harm, honesty, and generosity, we create positive karma that shapes our experiences in the present moment. When we act with good intentions, our minds are more likely to experience peace and joy, as opposed to the torment of hatred and selfishness. Lastly, wisdom, the understanding of the impermanent and interconnected nature of all things, is the key to breaking free from the cycle of suffering. The Buddha taught that the root causes of suffering are ignorance, craving, and attachment. When we let go of our attachment to outcomes, our desires, and our expectations, we free ourselves from the mental states that lead to suffering. Transforming mental realms. In conclusion, understanding heaven and hell as mental states shaped by karma radically shifts the way we approach our lives. It teaches us that we are not helpless victims of external circumstances, but active creators of our own experiences. Every thought, every word, and every action contributes to the mental realm we inhabit. By cultivating positive actions and thoughts, we can begin to experience the bliss of the Deva realms right here and now, transforming our daily lives into a reflection of inner peace and joy. By practicing mindfulness, living ethically, and developing wisdom, we can break free from the cycle of suffering and create our own personal heaven. Not in some distant afterlife, but in the present moment. Heaven and hell are not destinations, they are the realms we create within ourselves. 2. Karma and its impact. Karma is one of the central teachings of Buddhism and has a profound impact on how we experience the world around us. In its simplest form, karma refers to the law of cause and effect, the idea that our actions, whether good or bad, create consequences in our lives. These consequences aren't just external, they're deeply linked to our mental and emotional states. In Buddhism, karma isn't a concept reserved for the afterlife. It's something that plays out every day in every thought, word, and action. Through karma, we shape our present experiences, creating either heavenly or hellish realities based on the energy we put into the world. Karma is often misunderstood as some form of divine judgment, as though some higher power is keeping score of our actions and punishing or rewarding us accordingly. However, in the Buddhist context, karma is not a force of external judgment, but an internal law of nature, much like gravity. It's not personal, it's impersonal. Every action has a consequence, whether or not we are conscious of it, and this is where personal responsibility comes into play. Our thoughts, words, and actions not only affect our outer world, but also directly impact our internal state, which is where heaven or hell is created. The law of cause and effect, understanding karma. In Buddhism, karma is understood through the law of cause and effect. For every action, there is a corresponding reaction. But this law applies not just to physical actions, but to mental and emotional actions as well. If you act out of greed, hatred, or ignorance, you sow the seeds for future suffering. If you act with kindness, compassion, and wisdom, you create the conditions for peace and happiness. For example, let's take a personal experience. A few years ago, I was going through a rough period in my life. At the time, I felt deeply frustrated with a close friend who had let me down. Instead of discussing the issue openly, I bottled up my feelings, letting resentment and anger take root. I began harboring these negative thoughts, letting them fester in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more upset I became. My body grew tense, my mood soured, and I began to avoid the friend altogether. What I didn't realize at the time was that I was creating my own suffering. My thoughts, unchecked by mindfulness, led me into a mental state of hell. I was, in essence, experiencing hell, not because my friend had done something terrible, but because of my inability to process and release my anger. This inner turmoil clouded my perceptions and made my interactions with others more difficult. I was caught in a cycle of negativity, which kept me trapped in that emotional state. Eventually, I decided to practice mindfulness and acknowledge the anger I was feeling. By recognizing my thoughts and emotions, I was able to release them. I apologized to my friend, cleared the air, and let go of the resentment. Once I did this, I felt lighter, more at peace, like I had stepped out of a mental prison. This shift in my mindset transformed my experience from one of hellish suffering to one of peace and understanding. In this situation, I was able to break free from my negative karma and experience a heavenly state. Not because anything externally had changed, but because I had changed internally. This story highlights the key point. Karma is not about a distant future or some cosmic judge deciding your fate. Karma is something you're creating every moment, based on how you choose to respond to the world. The emotional and mental states we cultivate through our actions, whether positive or negative, shape our current experiences and our future realities. Karma as a reflection of our mental states. Karma is intricately tied to our mental states. In Buddhism, the mind is seen as the starting point for all actions. The Buddha famously said, "Mind precedes all phenomena. Mind is their chief. They are mind-made." What this means is that our thoughts shape our actions, which then create the karma that impacts our lives. When we act from a place of anger, greed, or jealousy, we are planting seeds of suffering for ourselves. These seeds will grow into negative experiences that reflect the nature of the thoughts and emotions we've nurtured. For example, if we hold a grudge against someone, our resentment may manifest as stress, anxiety, or even physical health problems, as the negative energy builds up inside us. Conversely, when we act from a place of kindness, patience, and understanding, we plant seeds of peace and joy. These seeds manifest as positive experiences in our lives, such as harmonious relationships, a sense of inner calm, and overall well-being. The Buddha taught that if we want to experience happiness and freedom, we must begin by cultivating positive mental states. A good illustration of this can be found in a story I experienced with a colleague. A few months ago, I had a misunderstanding with someone at work. I was upset with them for not meeting their commitments, and I felt frustrated. But instead of letting the anger consume me, I made a conscious effort to approach the situation with calm and compassion. I asked to meet with them, and we discussed the issue openly and respectfully. By coming from a place of understanding, I was able to clear the air and resolve the situation. The impact of this decision was immediate. My mental state shifted from frustration and resentment to understanding and peace. The energy between us also changed. The interaction felt positive and our relationship improved. This is an example of how our mental states, shaped by our actions and intentions, create either a heavenly or hellish experience, not only for ourselves, but for those around us as well. The impact of negative and positive karma. Karma is not simply about good or bad actions. It's about the intention behind the action. In Buddhism, the motivation behind what we do is just as important as the act itself. A small action done with great kindness can generate a lot of positive karma, while a seemingly good action done with negative intentions can create harmful karma. For example, consider the act of giving a gift. If you give a gift to someone out of genuine love and kindness without expecting anything in return, you are generating positive karma. Your intention is pure, and the act itself contributes to creating goodwill and happiness. On the other hand, if you give a gift to someone with the expectation of receiving something in return, or if you give it to impress others, your intention is driven by selfishness, and the karma generated by this action may not be as positive. In my own life, I've seen this dynamic play out in small ways. One time, I volunteered to help a friend move into a new apartment. Initially, I didn't really want to help. I was tired and had other plans, but I chose to show up anyway. And as the day went on, I found myself genuinely enjoying the experience. I realized that by letting go of my reluctance and choosing to help with a positive attitude, I was not only doing something good for my friend, but I was also creating a positive mental state for myself. By the end of the day, I felt happier and more connected to my friend, and I also felt a sense of inner fulfillment. This is a simple example of how a seemingly small act, done with the right intention, can create positive karma that ripples out into the world. Conversely, when I've acted out of selfishness or ego, I've noticed how those actions often come back to me in the form of disappointment, frustration, or even loneliness. For example, there have been times when I've made decisions to benefit myself at the expense of others. While I may have gained something in the short term, the long-term consequences often left me feeling unsatisfied and disconnected. These experiences show how negative karma, even from small, seemingly insignificant actions, can lead to suffering down the road. Taking responsibility for our karma. The most important aspect of karma is that it places the responsibility squarely on our shoulders. We are not helpless victims of fate or divine punishment. We are the creators of our own reality. Every thought, word, and action we take contributes to the karma we accumulate, which shapes our experiences both now and in the future. This realization can be empowering, as it means we have the power to change our lives through conscious choices. If we want to experience peace, happiness, and freedom, we must take responsibility for the mental and emotional states we cultivate. If we want to transform our lives, we must transform our minds. The Buddha taught that the path to liberation is one of cultivating right actions, right speech, and right thoughts. By consciously choosing actions that are rooted in kindness, generosity, and wisdom, we can change the course of our karma, and with it, the trajectory of our lives, creating heaven and hell in the present moment. Ultimately, the practice of understanding karma and its impact on our lives is about recognizing that heaven and hell are not distant, abstract concepts. They are states of mind that we create every day through our actions, thoughts, and intentions. By taking responsibility for the karma we generate, we can begin to shift our mental states and create a reality that aligns with peace, joy, and liberation. Karma is not about reward or punishment. It's about cause and effect. And through the practice of mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom, we have the power to shape the world we experience. Whether we find ourselves in heaven or hell depends on the choices we make every day. Choices that can either create suffering or happiness, both for ourselves and others. The key is to take responsibility for the energy we put into the world and to cultivate the mental and emotional states that lead to true freedom and inner peace. 3. The 6 realms of existence. In Buddhism, the concept of the 6 realms of existence offers a fascinating view into the nature of our mental states and their impact on the quality of our lives. The 6 realms, Deva, human, Asura, animal, Preta, and Naraka, are traditionally seen as different realms or states of existence in the cosmic cycle of birth, death, and rebirth known as samsara. However, these realms are not necessarily distant places one goes to after death. Instead, they represent mental states that we experience throughout our lives, shaped by our karma. The six realms are not static or permanent. They are mental states we move through, depending on the actions, intentions, and thoughts we cultivate. In this section, we will explore each of these realms in detail, illustrating how they correspond to psychological states that reflect our inner world. By understanding these realms, we gain valuable insights into how our minds shape our reality and how we can begin to create the kind of life we wish to experience. 1. The Deva realm, blissful but impermanent. The Deva realm, often considered the realm of gods or heavenly beings, is one of the most appealing in traditional Buddhist cosmology. Beings in this realm experience immense pleasure and joy. They live in what seems like an ideal, carefree existence, filled with comfort, beauty, and delight. However, this realm is not eternal. The happiness experienced by beings in the Deva realm is impermanent, as it is based on the good karma they have accumulated, and once this karma runs out, they are reborn into another realm. The Deva realm is a reflection of the mental state we enter when we experience moments of bliss and pleasure in life, such as when we are surrounded by beauty or enjoying the fruits of our hard work. But like all experiences in samsara, it's fleeting. The Deva realm is a mental state of temporary satisfaction where everything seems perfect, yet it is ultimately unsustainable. As long as the beings in this realm remain attached to their enjoyment and fail to realize its impermanence, they remain stuck in the cycle of rebirth, much like we do when we cling to the fleeting pleasures of life. I once found myself experiencing a Deva realm moment during a vacation with close friends. The weather was perfect, the food was amazing, and we spent our days in pure relaxation, feeling as though nothing could go wrong. It was one of those moments where everything felt right, and I thought, this is heaven. But as the days passed, I realized that this perfect feeling was fleeting. The vacation ended, and with it, the happiness I had enjoyed. I was left with a longing for that state of bliss, which reminded me of the impermanence of the Deva realm. This experience showed me how easy it is to get attached to happiness, and how, even in the best moments, there's always a need for awareness of impermanence. Number 2, the human realm, the realm of possibility and growth. The human realm is considered the most valuable realm in Buddhism. It is the realm where we, as human beings, live, and it is seen as the most favorable realm for spiritual growth. This is because humans are in a unique position to understand the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, and to practice mindfulness and meditation. Unlike beings in the Deva realm, humans are not trapped in a cycle of sheer pleasure. And unlike beings in the animal realm, we have the capacity for reasoning, self-reflection, and moral choice. However, the human realm is also characterized by suffering. We experience both happiness and pain, and it is this duality that makes the human experience rich with potential for spiritual development. Our suffering is not only inevitable, but also an opportunity for growth. In the human realm, we have the capacity to make moral decisions, and the choices we make, our karma, determine the direction of our lives. I think of a time when I was facing a significant career decision. I had the choice between a stable job offer and pursuing a passion project that was uncertain but deeply fulfilling. The stress and uncertainty I felt were overwhelming, yet I realized that this was an opportunity for personal growth. Instead of choosing the safe option, I chose to follow my passion. The process was filled with both joy and struggle, but ultimately it was the most rewarding experience of my life. This experience showed me how the human realm, with its challenges, provides the greatest potential for spiritual development. 3. The Asura realm, power and discontent. The Asura realm, often depicted as the realm of titans or demigods, is a state of existence characterized by power, competitiveness, and jealousy. Asuras are powerful beings, often depicted as being in constant conflict with one another, driven by a thirst for power, dominance, and superiority. Despite their strength and influence, beings in the Asura realm are never satisfied. They are consumed by envy, always feeling that something is lacking and constantly striving to attain more. The Asura realm corresponds to the mental state we experience when we are driven by ambition, jealousy, and a desire for control. It is a state of perpetual dissatisfaction, where we are never content with what we have and are always chasing after more. We may achieve success and gain power, but we are still left feeling unfulfilled and restless. This is the mental state of an Asura, where one's desire for greatness becomes a source of suffering rather than joy. I've had moments in my own life when I could relate to the Asura realm. During a period of intense career competition, I found myself constantly comparing my success to others. I wanted to be better, faster, and more influential. Despite achieving some of my professional goals, I still felt a sense of emptiness. I was caught in a cycle of comparison and jealousy, always wanting more, but never feeling satisfied. It wasn't until I let go of that constant drive for superiority that I was able to find peace. I realized that the Asura realm is a reflection of the discontent we feel when we prioritize competition over contentment. 4. The animal realm, instinct and survival. The animal realm is a realm defined by instinct and survival. Beings in this realm are driven by basic needs and instincts, such as hunger, thirst, and the need for safety. They cannot reflect on their actions or develop spiritually. They are focused on surviving rather than thriving, constantly driven by the demands of their physical bodies and environment. This realm represents a mental state that is focused on survival and immediate gratification. It is the state we experience when we are driven purely by our instincts and desires, without the capacity for deeper reflection or moral consideration. When we act impulsively, without thinking about the consequences, we are in the animal realm. In my own life, I recall a time when I was stuck in a cycle of workaholism. I was so focused on meeting deadlines and pushing through tasks that I didn't stop to reflect on my well-being or the impact of my actions. My thoughts were consumed by the need to survive in the competitive work environment, and I ignored the need for balance and self-care. It was only when I experienced burnout that I realized I had been trapped in the animal realm. This was a reminder of how easy it is to fall into a mental state dominated by survival instincts without considering the long consequences. Number 5, the Preta realm, insatiable desire. The Preta realm, also known as the realm of hungry ghosts, is a state of existence characterized by insatiable cravings and desires. Beings in this realm are depicted as having enormous, empty bellies and tiny mouths, forever attempting to consume but never able to satisfy their hunger. This realm represents the mental state we experience when we are consumed by greed, attachment, and unfulfilled desires. In our modern world, many of us can relate to the Preta realm when we find ourselves constantly desiring more. Whether it's material possessions, recognition, or success. We may accumulate wealth, but it never feels enough. We may receive praise, but we are still hungry for more. This constant craving, with no end in sight, is the mental state of the Preta realm. A personal experience that reflects this realm occurred when I was working on a major project. I was focused so much on the end goal, promotion, recognition, success, that I overlooked the value of the journey itself. My desire for the outcome overshadowed everything else, and even after achieving success, I felt unfulfilled. It wasn't until I shifted my focus away from external rewards and appreciated the present moment that I felt true contentment. Number 6, the Naraka realm, suffering and torment. The Naraka realm, often depicted as the realm of hell, is a state of extreme suffering and torment. Beings in this realm experience intense pain as a result of their past actions, and their suffering is directly linked to the negative karma they have accumulated. However, in Buddhism, Naraka is not seen as an eternal state. The suffering is temporary and will eventually come to an end when the karma has been exhausted. The Naraka realm corresponds to the mental state we experience when we are overwhelmed by intense negative emotions, such as anger, hatred, fear, or guilt. These emotions can create a state of suffering so profound that we feel trapped in it, with no escape. However, like all other realms, this suffering is not permanent, and through mindfulness and self-awareness, we can free ourselves from this torment. I recall a time when I was consumed by regret after making a decision I felt was wrong. The mental suffering I endured during that period felt like being trapped in a mental hell. I couldn't stop replaying my mistakes in my mind, and the guilt was overwhelming. However, Once I accepted the consequences of my actions, learned from them, and took responsibility, the torment gradually lessened. This experience reminded me that the Naraka realm is not a permanent state, but one that can be overcome through self-awareness and growth. Understanding the realms as mental states. The 6 realms of existence in Buddhism provide a powerful framework for understanding the ways in which our minds shape our experiences. These realms are not distant destinations awaiting us after death. They are psychological states that we experience right here, right now. By understanding how these realms correspond to our mental states, we can begin to see how our actions and intentions influence our lives. Whether we find ourselves in a realm of bliss, discontent, survival, craving, or suffering, we have the power to change our state of mind and move toward liberation. Number 4, real-life examples and stories. Storytelling plays an essential role in making abstract teachings more tangible and relatable. It allows us to connect emotionally with the teachings and see how they apply to real-life situations. The power of story is not just in its ability to entertain, but in how it illustrates the profound transformation that is possible through simple shifts in mindset and behavior. In Buddhism, many stories, both ancient and modern, demonstrate the possibility of moving from hellish mental states to heavenly ones. These stories highlight how individuals, through mindfulness, ethical actions, and a change in perspective, can transcend suffering and experience peace and joy, regardless of external circumstances. Let's explore some of these stories and consider how they might reflect our own struggles and growth. 1. The story of Magga, from deeds of kindness to the Deva realm. One of the most famous stories in Buddhist tradition is that of Magga, a man who exemplified the power of good deeds and moral conduct. Magga was a person of deep moral integrity and generosity. Throughout his life, he gave freely to those in need, helped those in distress, and practiced ethical conduct. His kindness wasn't just a matter of outward action, it was an expression of his inner state. He lived a life in accordance with the Buddha's teachings of compassion, kindness, and generosity. At the time of his death, Magga was reborn in one of the highest Deva realms, the Tavatimsa, a blissful heavenly realm filled with peace and happiness. His good karma, accumulated through acts of selfless generosity and ethical living, led to his rebirth in this beautiful realm. However, Magga's story also has an important lesson about the impermanence of all things, including happiness. Magga's time in the Deva realm was indeed filled with pleasure and joy, but he eventually realized that even the most perfect happiness in this realm was not permanent. After enjoying all the pleasures of the Deva realm, he recognized that the ultimate goal was not to remain in this state of bliss, but to transcend the cycle of birth and death entirely. Magga's journey shows us that even the most heavenly of states is temporary and cannot provide lasting peace if we become attached to it. The story of Magga highlights how our actions and intentions shape our karmic path. He was able to experience a blissful existence due to his ethical conduct, but he understood that liberation lies beyond the cycle of rebirth itself, in Nibbana, a state of ultimate peace. This teaches us that while positive actions can lead to a heavenly experience, true freedom comes from understanding the impermanence of all things and striving for liberation from the cycle of samsara. Number 2. Angulimala, from a hellish existence to enlightenment. The story of Angulimala is one of the most dramatic examples of transformation in Buddhist teachings. Angulimala was once a ruthless bandit known for his violent actions and complete disregard for life. His name, meaning finger necklace, was a result of the gruesome practice of killing people and wearing their fingers as a necklace. Angulimala's life was a manifestation of the Naraka, hell realm. He was trapped in a cycle of hatred, violence, and suffering. At one point, Angulimala's path of destruction was interrupted when he encountered the Buddha. The Buddha, seeing the potential for change in Angulimala, approached him and spoke to him with compassion, urging him to abandon his violent ways. Initially, Angulimala was resistant, but something about the Buddha's presence and teaching sparked a shift in him. Over time, through reflection and mindfulness, Angulimala experienced a radical transformation. He gave up his life of violence and dedicated himself to following the Buddha's teachings. Angulimala's story is a powerful example of how someone can shift from a hellish state, characterized by violence, hatred, and suffering into a state of peace and mindfulness. By choosing to abandon his past actions and dedicate himself to ethical living, Angulimala was able to transcend his karma and experience the bliss of enlightenment. Angulimala's transformation teaches us that no matter how deep in suffering we are, change is always possible. His story reminds us that we are not defined by our past actions, and that through mindfulness, ethical conduct, and sincere effort, we can transform our lives from a state of hell to one of peace and joy. Even when we feel trapped in negative mental states, we can always choose to shift our mindset and make a positive change in our lives. 3. A personal example. Overcoming negative thought patterns. As much as we love the stories of ancient sages, transformation doesn't only happen in the faraway past or in distant realms. It happens every day in the decisions we make and the way we choose to respond to the world around us. Let me share a personal example from my own life that illustrates how transforming my mindset shifted my experience from a hellish state to a more peaceful, heavenly one. A few years ago, I was in a difficult situation at work. A major project I was leading had hit several roadblocks, and I felt like everything was falling apart. My team wasn't meeting deadlines, and I felt a sense of deep frustration and self-doubt. The more I focused on the problems, the more overwhelmed I became, and my thoughts started to spiral into negativity. I began to feel like I was stuck in a mental hell, constantly battling my own frustration and stress, unable to see a way out. It wasn't until I recognized how my mindset was shaping my experience that I realized the power I had to shift my internal state. I decided to take a step back and practice mindfulness, acknowledging my feelings of frustration without judgment, but also choosing not to let those feelings dictate my actions. Instead of reacting out of anger or stress, I began approaching the situation with more patience, clarity, and compassion for myself and my team. Gradually, the atmosphere shifted. The energy in the office became lighter, and my interactions with my team improved. By choosing a different mindset, one based on mindfulness and understanding, I was able to transform my experience from one of mental chaos to one of calm and control. This transformation mirrors what we see in the Buddhist teachings about shifting from the Naraka hell realm to a more peaceful state. This personal experience shows us that the heavenly or hellish states we experience don't just exist in abstract concepts or in ancient stories. They are real, tangible experiences that we live through in our day-to-day lives. By choosing to practice mindfulness, shift our perspective, and act with compassion, we can transform our present moment and shift from suffering to peace. 4. The power of compassion, shifting from hell to heaven. The Buddhist teachings emphasize the transformative power of compassion. One of the clearest examples of this transformation can be seen in the story of Venerable Ananda, a close disciple of the Buddha. Ananda had a deep understanding of the Buddha's teachings, but he also struggled with feelings of self-doubt and inadequacy. At one point, Ananda became deeply distressed about his own perceived shortcomings, and he felt like he was not living up to the expectations placed on him. In the midst of his emotional turmoil, Ananda was reminded by the Buddha of the power of compassion, both for others and for oneself. The Buddha taught that compassion is not just about feeling for others, but about recognizing the suffering within ourselves and choosing to act with kindness and understanding. By cultivating compassion, Ananda was able to shift his mental state from one of despair and doubt to one of confidence and peace. This story illustrates how compassion for others and ourselves has the power to transform our mental states. By extending compassion, we can release negative emotions like anger and frustration, replacing them with a more peaceful and loving mindset. This shift can create a mental heaven where we experience greater joy, harmony, and connection with others. 5. A real-world example, shifting from anger to peace. One of the most powerful ways to move from a hellish state to a heavenly one is through forgiveness and the release of anger. A close friend of mine, let's call her Sarah, once experienced a significant betrayal. She had trusted a colleague with a project that was important to her career, only to find out that the colleague had taken credit for her work. Sarah was filled with anger, frustration, and bitterness, and it seemed like the negative emotions were consuming her. Her mental state was one of constant conflict and suffering, much like being trapped in the Naraka hell realm. However, over time, Sarah realized that holding on to anger was only hurting her, not the person who had betrayed her. Through mindfulness and deep self-reflection, she was able to let go of her anger and practice forgiveness. The act of forgiveness didn't mean she condoned the behavior, but it allowed her to free herself from the mental suffering that had been dominating her life. As a result, Sarah's mental state shifted from one of anger and bitterness to one of peace and acceptance. She was no longer carrying the burden of resentment, and she felt lighter, as though she had moved out of a hellish existence into a state of tranquility. Sarah's story demonstrates how forgiveness and letting go of negative emotions can shift us from suffering to peace. This shift in mindset is a clear example of how we can move from the hellish Naraka realm to the heavenly state of mental peace and liberation. The transformation is real. The stories of Magga, Angulimala Ananda, and real-life examples such as my own experiences and those of others highlight a simple yet profound truth. We have the power to change our mental states. Through mindfulness, compassion, and ethical actions, we can shift from states of suffering, whether they are characterized by anger, jealousy, or self-doubt, to states of peace, joy, and contentment. These transformations don't require us to change external circumstances. They only require us to change how we respond to those circumstances. When we take control of our minds, we can shift from hellish experiences to heavenly ones, and in doing so, we create the conditions for lasting happiness and inner peace. 5. Heaven and hell as present moments. In many traditional belief systems, heaven and hell are thought of as distant destinations that await us after death. They are often seen as fixed, external places where we are either rewarded or punished based on the choices we made during our lives. However, in Buddhism, heaven and hell are not simply concepts tied to the afterlife. They are not static realms that we enter once our physical bodies cease to exist. Instead, they are mental and emotional states we experience right here and right now, in our present moments. This shift in perspective is essential to understanding the deeper truths within Buddhist philosophy. Heaven and hell are not about waiting for something to happen in the distant future. They are reflections of the mental states we cultivate through our thoughts, words, and actions. Every moment we live, we are experiencing either a heavenly state or a hellish one, depending on how we choose to respond to life's challenges and opportunities. By recognizing this, we become empowered to take control of our mental and emotional states and to transform our experiences in the here and now. The power of the present moment. One of the most transformative aspects of Buddhist teachings is the emphasis on the present moment. In the teachings of the Buddha, there is no past or future in the ultimate sense, only the present moment. When we live fully in the present, we become more aware of our thoughts, our emotions, and how we react to the world around us. We can then see how our mental states, whether positive or negative, shape our experience of reality. The power of the present moment lies in the fact that it is the only time we truly have control over. The past is gone and the future is uncertain, but the present moment is ours to shape. We are constantly creating our mental and emotional states, whether we are conscious of it or not. By becoming mindful of this, we can begin to see how our thoughts and actions create our experience of heaven or hell in each moment. To illustrate this, I'll share a personal experience. A few years ago, I was going through a difficult period in my life. I had recently experienced a setback in my career, and I was feeling overwhelmed and uncertain about my future. Every day felt like a struggle, and my thoughts were consumed with worry, self-doubt, and frustration. It was as if I was living in a mental hell, trapped in a constant cycle of negative thinking and emotional turmoil. I felt disconnected from the present moment, if constantly ruminating on what had gone wrong and worrying about what might happen next. One day, I decided to try something different. Instead of focusing on my worries and frustrations, I made a conscious effort to ground myself in the present moment. I started by simply observing my thoughts without judgment, acknowledging my feelings, and allowing them to pass without attaching to them. I focused on what was happening around me, whether it was the sound of birds outside my window, the warmth of the sun, or the feeling of my breath as I sat in meditation. As I began to practice mindfulness, I noticed a shift. My mental state began to change. I stopped being consumed by my worries and started to feel more at peace. The emotional weight I had been carrying began to lift, and I felt lighter. By bringing myself into the present moment, I was able to transform my experience from one of suffering to one of calm and acceptance. It was a clear example of how the present moment holds the potential to create either a heavenly or hellish experience, depending on how we choose to engage with it. Heaven and hell as reflections of mental states. In Buddhism, the 6 realms of existence, Deva, human, Asura, animal, Preta, and Naraka, are not distant afterlife destinations, but mental states that we experience right now. These realms are reflections of the mental and emotional states we cultivate in our daily lives. Our thoughts, words, and actions determine which realm we inhabit at any given moment. For example, when we act with kindness, compassion, and wisdom, we experience a mental state of peace and joy, akin to the Deva realm. These are the heavenly states, where we feel connected, content, and at ease with ourselves and others. Conversely, when we act out of anger, jealousy, greed, or ignorance, we experience a mental state of suffering, much like the Naraka, hell realm. These are the hellish states, where we feel overwhelmed by negative emotions, disconnected from others, and trapped in our own suffering. The Buddhist perspective teaches that heaven and hell are not external to us, but are states of mind that we create through our actions and intentions. When we are kind to others, we are not just benefiting them, we are also creating a heavenly state within ourselves. On the other hand, when we act with anger or resentment, we are creating a hellish state within our minds. This idea emphasizes that we have the power to choose our mental states, and that by making conscious choices, we can move from suffering to peace, from hell to heaven in every moment. One example of this can be seen in the way we respond to challenges. When we face difficulties, we often have a choice. We can either respond with frustration and despair, or we can respond with patience and acceptance. In the first case, we may find ourselves slipping into a hellish state, feeling trapped by our negative emotions and thoughts. In the second case, we may find ourselves in a more peaceful and grounded state, experiencing the heaven of calm and resilience in the face of adversity. I remember a time when I was facing a particularly challenging project at work. It was a high-stakes assignment, and I was feeling the pressure. At first, I became anxious and overwhelmed. My thoughts raced, and I found myself spiraling into frustration and doubt. I realized, however, that I had a choice. I could either continue to get lost in my anxiety and stress, or I could choose to approach the situation with a calm and focused mindset. I decided to take a step back, breathe, and reframe the situation. Instead of seeing it as an overwhelming challenge, I viewed it as an opportunity for growth and learning. This shift in perspective allowed me to approach the project with a sense of calm and determination, which not only improved my work performance, but it also made the experience much more fulfilling. In that moment, I experienced a shift from a hellish state of anxiety to a heavenly state of peace and focus. The role of mindfulness in transforming mental states. Mindfulness is a key practice in Buddhism that helps us cultivate awareness of the present moment. Through mindfulness, we can begin to recognize the mental and emotional states we are experiencing and learn how to transform them. By observing our thoughts and emotions without judgment, we can prevent them from taking control of us and instead choose how we want to respond. Mindfulness allows us to create space between our experience and our reaction. Instead of reacting impulsively to external circumstances, we can pause, reflect, and choose how we want to respond. This ability to choose our reaction is what enables us to move between mental states of heaven and hell. When we are mindful, we are aware of our thoughts and emotions as they arise, and we can choose to let go of the ones that lead to suffering and nurture the ones that lead to peace. A few months ago, I was in a situation where I had to deal with a difficult conversation with a colleague. In the past, I would have reacted defensively, allowing my emotions to take over and potentially escalating the situation. However, through mindfulness practice, I was able to stay calm and composed during the conversation. I focused on listening to my colleague's perspective without judgment. and I responded with empathy and understanding. This allowed the conversation to remain productive and respectful, and it led to a positive resolution. By staying present and mindful, I was able to transform what could have been a hellish interaction into a heavenly one of mutual understanding. The power of choice, moving between heaven and hell. The key takeaway from the Buddhist perspective on heaven and hell is that we are not passive recipients of our experiences, we are active participants in creating our reality. Heaven and hell are not something that happens to us after death. They are mental states that we create in the present moment through our thoughts, words, and actions. By choosing to cultivate positive states of mind, we can move from suffering to peace, from hell to heaven, right here and right now. The power to transform our experience lies in our ability to choose how we respond to life's challenges. When we are faced with difficult situations, we can choose to react with anger, frustration, or despair, or we can choose to respond with patience, compassion, and understanding. The more we practice mindfulness and cultivate positive mental states, the more we can experience the heavenly states of peace, joy, and contentment. In every moment, we have the power to move between heaven and hell. By choosing mindfulness, ethical conduct, and compassion, we can transform our mental and emotional states and create a life that is peaceful, joyful, and fulfilling. Heaven and hell are not distant destinations that we must wait for. They are mental and emotional states that we experience right here, right now. By becoming mindful of our thoughts, words, and actions, we can recognize how we create our own experiences of heaven and hell in the present moment. Through mindfulness, compassion, and ethical living, we can choose to move from suffering to peace, from hell to heaven, and create a reality that reflects our highest potential. The power to create our own heaven or hell lies within us in the choices we make each and every day. 6. The path to liberation. In Buddhist philosophy, the ultimate goal is not to perpetuate the cycle of pleasure and pain, nor is it to remain in either heavenly or hellish states indefinitely. Instead, Buddhism teaches that the path to liberation, or nibbana, nirvana in Sanskrit, lies beyond these transient states. Nibbana is the cessation of suffering, the end of the cycle of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, and the realization of lasting peace and freedom. This liberation is not a destination that we reach after death. It is a profound state of mental and emotional freedom that can be experienced while we are still alive. In this section, we explore the core teachings of Buddhism that guide us along the path to liberation. The journey to Nibbana is a process of recognizing and relinquishing the causes of suffering, craving, attachment, and ignorance. It is a path of awakening, seeing the world as it truly is and shedding the layers of delusion and illusion that bind us to the endless cycle of suffering. The nature of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. At the heart of Buddhist teachings is the concept of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Samsara is the ongoing process of rebirth, driven by our karma, the actions and intentions that create the conditions for our future experiences. According to the Buddha, the cycle of samsara is characterized by suffering, or dukkha. This suffering is not limited to physical pain or discomfort. It also includes emotional and mental turmoil, such as fear, anxiety, longing, and dissatisfaction. The nature of samsara is that it is never permanent. We are constantly cycling through states of pleasure and pain, heaven and hell, in a never-ending loop. This cycle is driven by three fundamental causes: craving, tanha, aversion, dosa, and delusion, moha. These three poisons cloud our perception of the world, leading us to create karma that perpetuates our attachment to the cycle. We crave pleasure, avoid pain, and become attached to the idea of a permanent self, believing that happiness lies in external things. These attachments bind us to samsara, preventing us from breaking free from the cycle of suffering. To illustrate this, let me share a personal experience. Several years ago, I went through a particularly difficult breakup. At the time, I was emotionally attached to the idea of that relationship and the image I had built of my future with that person. When the relationship ended, I was consumed by pain and disappointment. I was stuck in the cycle of longing for what I had lost and avoiding the painful reality of the breakup. My thoughts were filled with what could have been and I struggled to let go of the attachment. This emotional turmoil was an example of how the cycle of craving and aversion works. I craved the happiness I once had and feared the pain of living without it. As a result, I remained trapped in a cycle of suffering. The more I clung to my desire for things to be different, the more I perpetuated my suffering. It wasn't until I began practicing mindfulness and reflecting on the impermanence of all things that I started to release my attachment. I realized that my suffering was not caused by the breakup itself, but by my attachment to the way I thought things should have been. This realization allowed me to step out of the cycle of craving and aversion and begin the process of healing. I began to see the pain, like everything else, was temporary, and that true peace comes from letting go of attachment. This process of letting go, of detaching from my suffering, is the essence of the path to liberation. Nibbana, the ultimate goal of Buddhism. At the core of Buddhist teachings is the concept of Nibbana, often translated as enlightenment or nirvana. Nibbana is the cessation of suffering and the end of the cycle of samsara. It is the ultimate goal of Buddhist practice, and it is a state of profound peace and freedom. Nibbana is not a state of passivity or nothingness. It is an active realization of the true nature of reality, a deep, experiential understanding that leads to the cessation of craving, aversion, and ignorance. The Buddha described Nibbana as the extinguishing of the flame of desire. Just as a flame burns due to fuel, the flame of craving and attachment burns us with suffering. When the fuel is extinguished, when craving, aversion, and delusion are overcome, the flame of suffering goes out. Nibbana is often described as a state of unconditioned peace, where the mind is free from the disturbances of greed, hatred, and ignorance. It is the realization that everything in the world is impermanent, and by letting go of attachment to things that come and go, we can experience lasting freedom. To better understand Nibbana, I can reflect on a time when I experienced a deep sense of inner peace. During a period of intense personal reflection, I spent several days in silence, meditating on the nature of my thoughts and emotions. The more I sat with my thoughts, the more I began to see them for what they truly were: temporary, fleeting, and without inherent substance. I realized that my constant striving for external validation, my attachment to past failures, and my desire for future success were all constructs of my mind. As I let go of these attachments and simply sat with the present moment, I experienced a profound sense of peace. It was as if the noise in my mind had quieted and I could simply exist in the present without clinging to anything. This experience, although temporary, was a glimpse into the state of Nibbana, a state of freedom from the cycle of craving and suffering. The path to Nibbana, the Noble Eightfold Path. The path to Nibbana is not something that happens overnight. It is a gradual process of purification and transformation. The Buddha taught the Noble Eightfold Path as the practical guide to liberation. This path is divided into 8 interconnected practices that work together to cultivate right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right lively effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. By following this path, individuals can gradually remove the obstacles to enlightenment and move toward the realization of Nibbana. 1. Right understanding. This is the understanding of the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. It is the intellectual and experiential understanding that suffering arises from attachment, and that liberation lies in letting go of this attachment. 2. Right intention. Right intention involves cultivating the intention of renunciation, non-ill will, and harmlessness. It means developing a mindset that is oriented toward compassion, loving kindness, and wisdom. 3. Right speech. Right speech refers to abstaining from lying, gossiping, harsh speech, and divisive speech. It involves using words that are truthful, kind, and helpful, promoting harmony and understanding in our relationships. 4. Right action. Right action is about living ethically, abstaining from killing, stealing, and engaging in sexual misconduct. It is about acting with integrity and aligning our actions with our values. 5. Right livelihood. Right livelihood involves earning a living in a way that does not harm others. It encourages ethical business practices and a lifestyle that supports well-being and respect for all living beings. 6. Right effort. Right effort is about cultivating the energy and discipline needed to prevent negative states of mind from arising, to eliminate negative states that have already arisen, and to cultivate positive states of mind. From 7, right mindfulness. Right mindfulness involves cultivating awareness of the present moment. It is about being fully aware of our thoughts, emotions, and actions without judgment or attachment. 8, right concentration. Right concentration is about developing deep mental focus and clarity through meditation. It is the practice of cultivating a calm, concentrated mind that is capable of seeing things as they truly are. Following the Noble Eightfold Path is the way to move from the cycles of suffering to the ultimate goal of Nibbana. Each aspect of the path helps to purify the mind, removing the mental defilements that bind us to samsara and open the way to liberation. The role of meditation in liberation. Meditation plays a central role in the path to Nibbana. It is through the practice of meditation that we develop mindfulness and concentration, which allow us to see the impermanent, unsatisfactory, and selfless nature of all phenomena. By practicing vipassana, insight meditation, we can observe the arising and passing of thoughts and emotions at realizing that they have no lasting essence. This realization is the key to overcoming attachment and craving. Meditation allows us to experience firsthand the truths taught by the Buddha. It is not just an intellectual exercise, it is a lived experience. Through meditation, we learn to let go of our attachment to the ego, to our desires, and to the false belief in a permanent self. As we progress along the path, we begin to experience moments of deep peace and clarity, which are glimpses of Nibbana. These moments are the natural result of letting go of the things that keep us trapped in the cycle of samsara. The liberation of Nibbana, freedom from suffering. Nibbana is not an escape from life or the world. It is the realization of life as it truly is. It is freedom from suffering because it is freedom from craving, aversion, and delusion. When we are no longer attached to the transient and impermanent aspects of existence, we experience a deep sense of peace and contentment that is unaffected by external circumstances. The path to Nibbana requires courage and perseverance, as it involves confronting our deepest fears, attachments, and illusions. But the reward is a state of freedom, where we are no longer bound by the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Nibbana is the cessation of suffering, the realization of ultimate peace, and the complete liberation of the mind. The teachings of the Buddha provide us with the tools to navigate this path, and through practice, dedication, and mindfulness, we can move closer to the ultimate goal of liberation. Nibbana is not something distant or unattainable. It is available to us here and now, in the present moment, as we awaken to the true nature of reality. Number 7, practical applications. The teachings of Buddhism are often seen as profound philosophical concepts, but they are not merely abstract ideas to be pondered upon. They are practical tools for living a more peaceful, meaningful life. Buddhism offers a roadmap for personal transformation, one that can help us break free from negative mental patterns and live with more mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. These tools, mindfulness, Sati, ethical conduct, Sīla, and wisdom, Paññā, are not just concepts to understand, but practices to incorporate into our daily lives. In this section, we will explore how to apply these tools in our own lives to cultivate greater peace and freedom. We'll look at how mindfulness helps us stay grounded in the present, how ethical conduct shapes our interactions with others, and how wisdom leads to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. By applying these principles, we can move from suffering to liberation, transforming our mental states in the process. 1. Mindfulness, Sati, living in the present moment. Mindfulness, or Sati, is one of the most important practices in Buddhism. It involves paying attention to the present moment with full awareness, without judgment. Mindfulness helps us break free from the cycle of negative thinking and emotional reactivity by allowing us to observe our thoughts, feelings, and sensations as they arise without getting caught up in them. This practice is not about suppressing emotions or thoughts, but about being aware of them as they come and go without attachment. Mindfulness allows us to step out of the constant mental chatter and connect with the present moment. By cultivating mindfulness, we develop a deeper awareness of our internal states and the world around us. This awareness helps us recognize when we are slipping into negative thought patterns, such as anxiety, anger, or resentment, and gives us the opportunity to pause, reflect, and choose a more skillful response. I remember a time when I was struggling with overwhelming stress at work. I was juggling multiple projects, trying to meet tight deadlines, and constantly feeling like I was on the edge of burnout. My mind was racing, and I found myself becoming increasingly frustrated and anxious. It felt as if I couldn't catch a break, and every task seemed like an insurmountable mountain. In the midst of this chaos, I decided to try a simple mindfulness technique, focusing on my breath. I took a few moments to close my eyes and simply observe the sensation of my breath as it entered and left my body. At first, it felt strange, like I wasn't doing anything productive. But as I continued to breathe mindfully, I began to notice something remarkable. My thoughts started to slow down. The stress that had been consuming me seemed to melt away, and I felt a sense of calm and clarity return. This simple act of mindfulness allowed me to regain control over my mental state. Instead of getting lost in my stress and anxiety, I was able to reconnect with the present moment and approach my tasks with a clearer, calmer mind. This experience showed me how mindfulness can be a powerful tool for transforming our mental state in the midst of challenging situations. To incorporate mindfulness into your own life, start by setting aside a few minutes each day to focus on your breath. When you notice your mind wandering or becoming overwhelmed, gently bring your attention back to your breath. Over time, you will develop a greater sense of presence and awareness, and you will be better equipped to navigate the challenges of daily life with a calm and balanced mind. 2. Ethical conduct, Sīla, living with integrity and compassion. Sīla, or ethical conduct, is another key principle in Buddhism. It involves living with integrity, kindness, and compassion toward others, as well as practicing non-harm in our thoughts, words, and actions. Ethical conduct is not about following a rigid set of rules, but about cultivating a sense of moral responsibility and making choices that benefit both ourselves and others. Sīla encompasses several aspects of life, including right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Right speech means avoiding lying, gossiping, or speaking in ways that cause harm to others. Right action involves acting with honesty and integrity, refraining from harmful behaviors such as stealing, killing, or engaging in misconduct. Right livelihood encourages us to make a living in ways that are ethical and do not cause harm to others. One of the most transformative experiences I had with ethical conduct occurred during a period when I was working in a highly competitive work environment. In a culture where ambition and success were valued above all else, I noticed that some colleagues were willing to cut corners, manipulate situations, and even deceive others to get ahead. At first, I felt pressure to follow suit in order to keep up, but something didn't sit right with me. I decided to make a conscious effort to stay true to my values, even if it meant taking a more difficult path. I focused on doing my work with honesty, integrity, and kindness, even when others around me were behaving in less ethical ways. Over time, I noticed a shift. Not only did I feel more at peace with myself, but I also gained the respect of my colleagues. My decision to act with integrity, even in challenging circumstances, helped me build stronger, more meaningful relationships at work, and it reinforced the sense of purpose and fulfillment I felt in my career. The practice of ethical conduct is not always easy, especially in environments that may not prioritize kindness and honesty. However, by aligning our actions with our values and choosing to act with compassion, we create a foundation of trust, respect, and peace that benefits both ourselves and those around us. To apply ethical conduct in your life, start by reflecting on your actions and their impact on others. Consider how you can bring more kindness and integrity into your interactions, whether in your personal relationships, at work, or in your community. Practice right speech by being mindful of how you communicate and avoid speaking in ways that cause harm or division. Act with compassion and choose to make decisions that reflect your highest values. 3. Wisdom, Paññā, seeing the world as it truly is. The third key principle of Buddhism is wisdom, Paññā. Wisdom involves understanding the nature of reality and seeing things as they truly are. It is the ability to discern the impermanence, suffering, and non-self nature of all things. Wisdom allows us to break free from delusions and attachments, and it is the foundation for true liberation. In Buddhism, wisdom is developed through the practice of right understanding and right concentration. Right understanding means seeing the world clearly, understanding the Four Noble Truths, and recognizing the interconnectedness of all things. Right concentration involves developing deep mental focus and clarity through meditation, which allows us to gain insight into the true nature of reality. One of the most impactful moments of wisdom I experienced came during a period of personal loss. I had recently lost a close family member, and the grief I felt was overwhelming. For weeks, I struggled to come to terms with the loss, unable to shake the feeling of emptiness and sadness. I clung to the idea of the person I had lost, and I couldn't let go of the pain. During this time, I decided to spend some time in meditation, focusing on the impermanence of life. As I meditated, I began to realize that everything in life is transient, including the people we love. Our attachment to things and people is what causes suffering, not the things themselves. I recognized that my grief was a natural response to the loss, but it was also rooted in my attachment to the idea of permanence. Everything is in a constant state of change, and by accepting this, I could begin to release my suffering. This realization didn't diminish the pain of my loss, but it gave me a deeper sense of peace. I understood that just as the person I loved had come into my life, they would also leave, as all things do. This insight allowed me to accept the impermanence of life and move forward with a greater sense of wisdom and understanding. Wisdom, in this sense, is not about intellectual knowledge alone. It is the ability to see beyond the surface of things and to understand the deeper truths of existence. It is the realization that all things are interconnected and that our attachment to them is what causes suffering. To cultivate wisdom in your life, engage in practices like meditation, self-reflection, and study of the Buddha's teachings. Focus on understanding the impermanent nature of all things and challenge yourself to let go of attachment to people, possessions, and outcomes. By developing wisdom, we can learn to live with greater peace, clarity, and freedom. Bringing it all together, mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom in daily life. Mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom are not separate practices. They work together to create a life of greater peace, joy, and liberation. When we practice mindfulness, we become aware of our thoughts and actions, allowing us to make more conscious choices. When we align our actions with ethical conduct, we create a foundation of integrity and compassion that enhances our well-being and the well-being of others. And when we cultivate wisdom, we begin to see the world as it truly is, allowing us to break free from delusion and attachment. These three practices, mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom, serve as tools for transformation. They help us break free from negative mental patterns and create a life that is in harmony with the deeper truths of existence. By integrating these practices into our daily lives, we can move closer to the goal of liberation, experiencing greater peace and freedom in the present moment. To start applying these practices in your own life, begin by incorporating small changes into your daily routine. Practice mindfulness by setting aside time each day to be present with your thoughts, emotions, and actions. Reflect on your ethical conduct by considering how you can act with kindness and integrity in all areas of your life. And cultivate wisdom by studying the teachings of the Buddha, meditating on the impermanence of life, and seeking to understand the deeper nature of reality. Through these practices, you will find that your mental states begin to shift, and your experience of the world will transform. The path to liberation is not a distant goal. It is available to us right here, right now, in the choices we make each day. By applying mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom in our lives, we can move closer to the ultimate goal of peace and freedom. 8. Reflection. In this exploration of Buddhist teachings, we've journeyed through the profound concepts of karma, the 6 realms of existence, mindfulness, ethical conduct, wisdom, and the ultimate goal of liberation through nibbana. These teachings are not just abstract philosophies to be learned. They are tools that we can use to transform our mental states and lives. As we've seen, our mental and emotional experiences, our heavenly or hellish states, are not fixed, but are shaped by our thoughts, words, and actions. Through mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom, we have the power to shift from suffering to peace, from ignorance to understanding, and from attachment to freedom. Buddhism offers us a path that is accessible and practical in our daily lives. The practices we've discussed, mindfulness, ethical living, and cultivating wisdom, can be integrated into every moment, helping us break free from negative mental patterns and create a life of peace, compassion, and clarity. This path is not one of instant perfection, but one of gradual progress as we learn to embody the principles of Buddhism in each of our actions. But how can we begin to apply these teachings in our own lives? This is where the personal reflection comes in. Reflecting on your own mental states. Take a moment to pause and reflect. What mental states have you been living in lately? Are you caught in cycles of frustration, anger, or anxiety? Do you find yourself frequently overwhelmed by cravings, desires, or regrets? Or have you experienced moments of peace, joy, and clarity, moments that feel more aligned with a heavenly state? As you reflect on your own mental states, consider how you can start making small, conscious changes. Are there areas in your life where you could be more mindful? Could you practice more compassion toward yourself and others? Are there thoughts, words, or actions you could shift to cultivate more wisdom and understanding? These reflections are not about judgment or perfection, but about becoming aware of where you are and where you want to go. By recognizing the mental states that drive our experiences, we gain the ability to change them. Buddhism teaches us that through awareness and intention, we can step out of suffering and into peace, right here and right now. Start your journey toward inner peace. The journey toward inner peace and liberation begins with one small step. By committing to mindfulness, ethical living, and cultivating wisdom, you begin to transform your mental and emotional states, and with it, your entire experience of life. It's not about waiting for external circumstances to change. It's about changing ourselves moment by moment. As you move forward, I encourage you to continue exploring these teachings. Take the time each day to engage in mindfulness practice, reflect on your ethical conduct, and cultivate wisdom through study and meditation. The more you practice, the more you will begin to experience the shifts in your mind and heart. If you found this video helpful and are ready to start your journey toward inner peace, consider subscribing to this channel for more insights on how Buddhist teachings can help you live a more mindful, peaceful, and fulfilling life. This journey isn't something you do alone. By engaging with these teachings and with a community of like-minded individuals, we can support each other on the path to liberation. So, take that first step today. Reflect on your current mental state, make a conscious choice to shift your mindset, and start practicing mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom in your everyday life. The path to peace is waiting for you. Take the next step toward your own freedom and transformation. Reflect on your mental states and where you can make shifts. Subscribe to the channel for more insights and tools to cultivate mindfulness and peace. Start your journey today. Take one small action to shift your mental state towards peace, wisdom, and compassion. Your journey to liberation begins now.